I did this morning was talk about how we use silvopasturing on our ranch in Argentina and on our farm here in upstate New York over in the Watkins Glen area, to how we do it and why we do it. And that what I'm going to do now is share a little bit of the learning curve. Someday I'll write my memoirs of the mistakes I made doing silvopasturing, but I want to probably leave you with a half a dozen really important things to keep in mind as you're moving forward with your projects. Those are pictures there of our ranch and our farm in New York. I'll let you guess which one is which. So Joe made this point, Peter made this point. I've come to really appreciate the importance of animal impact in managing the vegetative response in understories when we let sunlight in. So developing silvopastures from existing wooded areas or plantations, I think of it as kind of a three-step process. We thin to reallocate sunlight on the ground. We create conditions for desirable plants to germinate, become established, but then we have to use our skilled grazing to promote the growth of the good plants and discourage the growth of the bad plants, because it's all going to come in together. And in many of these somewhat degraded farm woodlot systems or old overgrown pasture lands that we see opportunity to convert to silvopasture, the presence of those bad plants is already there. They may seem like little benign green things, but when they're there, they're ready to roll as soon as they get enough sunlight, because there was some disturbance, whether it's a man-made disturbance like cutting trees or natural disturbance, a storm or emerald ash borer or some other pest comes in and kills a bunch of your trees. There's going to be a change in the understory, and good forestry tries to stay ahead of the curve and influence that composition to something that contributes to our ownership objectives. One of the ways that we try to create adequate animal impact is we have a lot of paddocks on our farm. This is just the home farm. It's about 200 acres. We lease an adjacent 250 acres. It's the home farm, you can see from the table on the left, is divided into 50 paddocks. This is actually an older map. We've subdivided some of the silvopasture paddocks, but you can see it's half woods, half field. And a lot of those paddocks are rectangular shaped, so it's very easy to subdivide and create density. Density is our friend, because when we let things get away from us in our open pastures, we can go out there with a brush hog or the spray rig, or worst case, plow it up and start over again. When things get away from us in the woods, we don't have many of those tools. We're certainly not going to plow it up and start again. So creating animal impact is how we're going to manage that vegetation. And impact is just quickly, it's a reflection of many things, but it's density, it's interval, it's frequency, it's intensity of the grazing. It's has to do with site variables, has to do with time of the year. For example, you're not going to get the same impact on maybe target species that you're trying to control when they have no foliage on them in the winter versus summer. And ground conditions and animal diets. Peter mentioned, I think, Goats in the Woods project that Cornell did almost 20 years ago, and they incentivized the goats to strip the bark off the target undesirable plants by giving them a low-fiber diet. They had to supplementally feed them, otherwise they were borderline starving them to death, but the goats would crave fiber and therefore strip the bark off the young beech trees and striped maple and ironwood and plants that we were trying to control in the understory. Control residues. We've already defined the term slash. For logging debris is known as slash, but to the extent possible that when we're doing a thinning operation we can remove most of that material, it's going to be helpful, because if we're trying to achieve very high densities to create high animal impact, even small, like this is a 5 or 6 inch diameter hemlock tree, but you can see that by cutting it off to now remove that layer of sunlight interception, you have this big mess on the ground that's going to be there for a long time, and all it's going to do is become a shelter for more undesirable plants to grow up through. So achieving very high density, mob grazing type densities in wooded areas is going to be more challenging than doing it in your open pasture, where there's pretty much unobstructed access to every square foot within the given spot you've allowed them to reach at that time. And this is where working with a forester can be very valuable, because there's many different types of harvesting operations. And the forester can help you think it through. How will you get most of that material dealt with in the woods versus just having them take out the sawlog portions of harvested trees and there's just a lot of slash left behind. This is a whole tree chipping operation. You don't just look these guys up in the yellow pages and have them show up next month to do your silvopasture thinning. This takes a lot of time and planning and sometimes arm twisting to get these kinds of operations, but they can leave the residual site very clean, and that'll allow us to get the needed impact. And then finally, and Peter talked a little bit about girdling trees. If we're doing it, especially at a small scale, these are European buckthorn. We had already gone through and mowed all the small diameter stems, but it would have been very costly to go through and grind up these trees that probably average 6 or 8 or 10 inches in diameter. And to cut these off, you're making more of a mess than before, because these are like 30-foot high buckthorn. You cut them off, they're still 30 feet tall. They're just horizontal at that point. And you just created a barrier across much of your grazable acreage that the animals can't access. And trust me, it's going to grow back up to bad things because you lost that ability to use the animal impact. So here we just girdled the trees, injected a little bit of herbicide into them, because buckthorn is like the classical hedge species. It's survived millennia of humans and animals trying to kill it. It's very difficult to control without chemicals. There are some creative ways. I know Catherine's trying to do it on her farm. Of course, she's a NOFA inspector. She'd get in trouble if she's out there spraying glyphosate all over the stumps. But these trees, once we kill them, the sunlight gets through, the seed bank expresses itself, but these trees just kind of rot down slowly and fall apart piece by piece. So now you do have 3 foresters stand before you today to tell you to put animals in the woods. Don't tell the Society of American Foresters. We're also telling you to use trees to build your fences on to the extent that you can. So Peter was just giving you an example of how the typical firewood tree might be worth $1. More realistically, it might be worth, half $1 or $1.50. In any case, it's not worth it. Costs you a lot more to go out and buy a fence post and then probably to install that fence post. About 80% of the cost of a typical high tensile fence is the cost of the post and the installation of the post. So there's a way that we can do this without sacrificing any real significant value of high quality saw timber trees. There's a picture of like a nice tree in the background and a firewood type tree in front of it. And what we've done there is use some sort of a durable batten, in this case treated lumber, but you could use locust or white oak, just something that's going to be around a while. And we're attaching our insulators to the batten and then pre-drilling it, attaching the batten to the tree with a heavy galvanized nail. Don't use flimsy nails, they'll just rust off in 5 years. But the key here is that you're using a fender washer between the nail head and the batten. So as that tree, usually you're using these suppressed trees that are growing very slowly anyhow, but they will, believe it or not, grow over time. And without that fender washer, they pop the nail off pop the batten off over the nail head. This was an idea that we got from Dave Kennard at Wellscroft Fence over in Keene, New Hampshire, when we did that workshop there 5 or 6 years ago. And he had been building fences this way because he's on top of granite bedrock. He can't even get a post in the ground in a lot of places, but he's got trees everywhere. So he's got a lot of these firewood type trees whose highest and best use is to hold his fence up. This is an example here. I like to use like a heavy diameter polytwine in the woods because if I need to take it down from some reason, I just reel it up. It's more visible to animals. It's not as dangerous as having high tensile cheese cutter type fences in the woods that where calves and fawns and things are going to run into it. But you can see the contrast here between a large white oak tree that's probably worth $100, and then that's about a 90-year-old tree, and then next to it is like a little 4 or 5 inch red maple, which is also a 90-year tree, believe it or not. It's just the one clinging to life, has just enough shade tolerance, and it's getting just enough sunlight. But that tree has enough vigor to still hold my fence up for probably 10 years or so. And trying to turn my alarm off here, sorry. Oh well, I'll just turn it off that way. So one tree is worth $100, the other is worth about 20 cents as firewood, and but it's saving me money as a fence post. And you'll notice it has some yellow paint on it. I've learned you want to mark these trees ahead of time if you're going to be doing a commercial thinning, because they'll disappear on you quick. If you can make them visible to the loggers, they can try and preserve some of those trees. Beyond the animal nutrition aspects and all the ecosystem functional aspects of diversity, it seems like every time we turn around today, there's a new bad bug or disease that's going to wipe out another species in our woods. And I've seen this with our tree planting, where a lot of the trees that we planted 25, 30 years ago on our farm, more than half of those trees today are dead or have very serious insect and disease issues. So hedge your bets and maintain a diversity of species. Don't just thin your woods out and leave only the oaks or only the white pine, because guess what? Something's going to come along and you're going to wish you'd left some other trees at some point. And down to about the last 2 points here. Silvopastures, you've heard a lot about planned grazing, being able to figure out where your animals are going to be weeks and even maybe months down the road. Silvopastures come in very handy during the dog days of summer. And a lot of times our woodlands that we may develop into silvopastures, they're growing on sites that the farmer abandoned once upon a time because they might be a little seasonally wet or have other issues. And by midsummer, usually though, those sites are, the soil conditions are good. This picture here was actually during a pretty serious drought we had about 5 years ago on the farm, taken in late July. And our cool season grasses at that time did not look very good. But you can see in here the cows are not only more comfortable because of the shade, but they got lots of green stuff to see them through that summer slump. And then finally, and Peter, used the analogy of the 50-acre train wreck. This is a mistake that I've made myself, and that I see a lot of other people doing. First of all, think it through, and that's that site assessment exercise and some other exercises we have on our forestry extension site that's on that handout are tools that you can use to try to anticipate, what am I overlooking here? But also know your limitations. I think we all feel that we can somehow get it done eventually, but with silvopasturing, if you bite off too much and you can't keep ahead of it with the capacity of livestock, or people get the tree planting bug in the late winter and they order 10,000 seedlings, and I'm not sure what was planted in those tubes, but I'm pretty sure it's not those smothering invasive vines that are growing, and so I see $10 wasted, $10 wasted, $10 wasted. It was a waste of people's time and money. And the picture on the right-hand side there, that's where clearly, and that's an exaggeration. It's a funny picture, but clearly that's not silvopasturing because some of the resources are being managed to the detriment of others. So